That's right. Yeah, that's sort of cool. Okay, I am so thankful that you are here. Yesterday, I was blessed to have about 40 people each class, and I was excited about that. And they said, now, this next time, so that it'll go out on YouTube, we want you to come and do it in the auditorium. And I thought, that's going to be so sad because there's going to be like one person. And then I thought, well, there's that one person, I'll definitely know where to focus. So that'll be all right. But I am glad you're here. And I'm glad we're going to be talking about the book of Ecclesiastes. In the first class yesterday, someone came up and said, I'm confused. Aren't you the evangelism guy? And I said, yes, the evangelism guy. And I said, but I also have this counseling part of ministry that I love to do. And Ecclesiastes is so rich when it comes to how to deal with your world at any time. In fact, as we go through it, you're going to say, that's just what we face now. And we're going to find we're a lot like Solomon without having all the money. But we're a lot like Solomon. We're going to talk about in this first lesson managing life and trying to find meaning in life in a world we really don't like so much. A world that really treats us sometimes pretty bad. Those who know me well know that I was a missionary and a dean and instructor at the Ukrainsky Biblinsky Institute, the Ukrainian Bible Institute in Donetsk, Ukraine. Now it's Russian-occupied Ukraine. The apartment building my family lived in was destroyed in the fourth day of the war. We had a children's hospital on the bottom. They had tanks come and blow up the children's hospital, and about 1,600 people in that building, the building just cratered. And I was talking to someone, and they said, how do you feel about that? And I said, I just want Jesus to come right now. I'm done. I've had enough. And I think that in different ways, in different parts of life, we get to that point where we just say, it's not working. It's not working, and I want to do something different. Life can be very frustrating and difficult at times. We face so many challenges, and we act like we weren't warned. But I went through and counted in the New Testament, I'm just going to read 3 of them, but 71 times we were told, you know, the world's not great. You're going to have some problems. To me, the classic passage is John 16:33, where Jesus says, in this world you will face tribulations. Tribulation, in the Greek, the word is best translated incredible pressure. It's the pressure that creates a diamond out of coal. Haven't you had times where you had that kind of pressure? I had a parent die with Alzheimer's and a parent die with dementia in the last year. and did their funerals and all that. Going with them through the dying process when they had no clue what was going on was like a constant pressure. They had signed over all their business stuff. They had signed over all their health stuff. They had signed everything over to me. So what it was, I would walk into the hospital room and they'd come and say, Chris, we need you to come sign these papers. This says that you refuse care for them if they need to go on a ventilator. This says that you refuse care for them if they need a feeding tube. All those different things, because that was my Father's wish. But now they're telling me to do that. And that was a pressure. That was a pressure. Raising our sons, occasionally a pressure. You know, all those different times. Jesus' younger brother James, in James 1 verse 2 said, brothers, you will face trials of many kinds. Many kinds literally means of every color. Every color. Haven't you seen someone going through something hard and you go, well, at least I don't have that? Because it's a different color than what I might face. But we see people with such tribulations. When I was in Malawi, South Central Africa the first time, I was talking to this woman and she said, my child is very sick. And I said, well, let's load him up. We'll take him to the hospital. He had an impacted bowel and they were going to have to do an operation. And she said, it's so expensive, we could never afford it. So I asked the doctor, how much is it going to cost? And he said, $24. And I looked at her and said, congratulations, it's free. You don't have to worry about it. But I did not grow up in a world where $24 means you're dead. But she faced a pressure I didn't have to face. And I've had to face pressures she didn't. My favorite one is 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12, where he says, don't be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you, as if something strange is happening to you. Now that's the best one. You're surprised that things aren't going right? You're surprised that this relationship falls apart? You're surprised you're having money problems? You should not be surprised at these fiery trials, these things that test your faith, when they come upon you. And I love what Peter did there. Just by saying fiery, it's like you've got your trial and it is hard to deal with. But what about when they put the trial on fire? It's just more than you would ever expect to handle. And he says, don't be surprised, that's what's coming. Peter, who was thrown in prison. Peter, who denied Jesus 3 times. Peter, who ran away in tears until Jesus brought him back and forgave him 3 times. Peter, who went through all these things. Peter, who spoke on Pentecost and then helped grow the Lord's church. He said, don't be surprised if your trials are on fire, because that's the way life is. It's what happens in a cursed, broken world. From the time of Adam and Eve, the world's been cursed. It doesn't work the way we want it to work. My wife called me and said, Chris, they just said that right along the path you're going to be traveling, there's going to be torrential rains. And I said, could you look up torrential in the dictionary and tell me what that means? And she said, it's going to be like them throwing buckets of water at your windshield. And I said, awesome. Awesome. That's what I was really hoping was going to happen. Now, I'm a farm kid. I do not believe that weather forecast. I've never believed one in my life. But things like that happen. We face many different challenges in life. I was talking to a young family who are going through some real marriage problems. And they both have a point. He did do something wrong. She did handle it horribly. That's marriage. It's what happens. Ask my wife. She knows. It is hard to go through and have a healthy marriage in an unhealthy world. And yet, sometimes we manage it. Raising faithful kids and grandkids. When I was a boy, a Bible class teacher told us, train up a child in the way he should go, and you never have to wonder about him falling away. That's actually not how that verse ends. They still have choice. Isaiah chapter 1, God says, I had all these great children and I raised them up, and now they don't know my name. There are some parents that feel that way. It can be a great challenge in today's world to do things like that. Dealing with aging. I'm going to see a physical therapist for my back. It's humiliating. I remember when my dad was like 10,000 years old and had problems with his back. Turns out he was 60, and now I'm 60. But I just look at it and go, I don't want this. But there's a great purpose in aging. It prepares us for the world to come. Dealing with aging family members. That's where I've lived the last couple of years. I would leave Wichita Falls at 8 p.m., get to Dumas, Texas at about 11:30, go in there and sit with mom and dad so my sister could get a night's sleep. They would be up and down, up and down, up and down. They had no clue why they were getting up or going down, but they were doing that. And then about 6 o'clock in the morning, I'd leave and get back to the office about 10. And it turns out we do need sleep sometimes. But it is a stress that some people know full well what it's like to deal with that. Here's one I don't know. Some know the pain of losing a spouse. I've lost about everything else. But I don't think I know true loss yet. Because in marriage, two people become one flesh. And to rip that apart hurts, and I think, in a whole different way. Even though it doesn't matter how many doctor's degrees you have in psychology, you can't know that till you do that. But I've always been amazed at people who handle it so well. Dealing with that grief. Dealing with finances. I was telling this young couple having marriage problems. I said, I remember when I was getting married, the main problem in marriages was adultery. It's now like number 6. Finances are by far, almost 60% of marriages that fail. It's finances, because it's just getting harder and harder to live that way. Dealing with even struggles inside your church family. You think that's the one place that would be safe, the one place you'd never be hurt. I can tell you that can sometimes be a challenge as well. I have just started my 46th year of preaching. I started at the age of 14 in Channing, Texas, and have been blessed to minister for a long time. I think just like the world's gotten harder, sometimes being in the Lord's church has gotten harder as we grow more and more distant, as we live in a world where we're more segmented. I think it can all be hard. Solomon was the son of David. Isn't that awesome? Oh wait, let me tell you the rest of it. He's the son of David and Bathsheba. Do you know the story? You think Solomon didn't have an unusual childhood, knowing that his father that took him into his home, into the palace, killed his father? That he sent men to get his mother and bring to him. You know, it's amazing to me that David is the man after God's own heart when he did some stuff. He had some issues. He had sons that raped daughters, sons that killed sons, a son that went to war against him, all these different things. But whenever I think of Solomon, somebody said inside a book, College Press commentary, they said he must have had the ideal childhood. Not in that family. No way, no how. He knew problems from the very beginning. He was the king of Israel, a powerful nation. It was the time when Israel was the world superpower. And he was blessed to be king. Do you think it's easy to be king of a superpower? King of the most dominant, powerful nation in the world? One of my favorite politicians was Condoleezza Rice. I love Condoleezza Rice. She was the Under Secretary of State when Colin Powell was the Secretary of State. And my father used to be on this committee that would help advise on who should be the vice president. And Dad said, I know who it is. It's Condoleezza Rice. But you know what she told him? She said, I saw George W. Bush go from being a young man to ancient, from being a happy, positive man to being harshly critical. The last thing I would ever do is lead this country. The challenge of it. Solomon was dealing with incredible challenges. He was blessed with incredible wisdom. 1 Kings chapter 3, God comes and says, you're the king, tell me what you want and I'll give it to you. And he said, I want the wisdom to lead your people well. And he says, I'm going to give you all the blessings, all the stuff you could have asked for. And he had more gold. He had more of everything. He had more wives, more concubines, all these different things. He had excess. And that can be hard to live with as well. He struggled with the same basic things we do. As you go through and read the book of Ecclesiastes, he talks about his problems in his family. He talks about all these different things. And we find that this very wealthy king from a long time ago, from a long way off, really understands what it's like to live in the world today. He became frustrated, pessimistic, depressed, anxious. And that made him almost delusional and cynical. He is writing when he's gone through all that. And he's back to what we call homeostasis. He's back to being able to feel level again. But he starts writing the book, remembering back to that time when he started, and it is bitter. It's hard to deal with. But problems are like that. And then by the time we get to the end, he said, oh, just make sure you remember God in your youth. He's thinking, if I had had the right priorities as a young man, I wouldn't have had all these problems. Can anybody identify with that besides me? I mean, my goodness. And he tells us about how to go through this process, and I think that's important. We go with him, yes?
Do you think Solomon, with his wisdom, that's what took him away from God?
No, because he's pretty clear it's his lusts. He says, I wanted this. I had this. I wanted more vineyards. I wanted more, and I wanted more concubines and all that. And I think that would be a problem for someone who had incredible wealth.
Like, for example, think of a farmer that built bigger barns.
Yeah.
That passage, it's always I.
Yeah.
And you look at that passage where Solomon said, I did this, I did
Yes.
this, I did this. And sometimes if people can, as when Jesus said, I want all of you, all of me and none of you.
Right.
And you know, like in a sense, you can develop self-sufficiency, which is wrong. If you have that kind of attitude, as the God has made the one of the new moms, and I thought maybe for Solomon it was that way, that because he had that.
Yeah.
And he's thinking, I can do it, and had a self-sufficiency.
Yes. Well, I was talking to my grandsons. I teach them every day. They now live in Longmont, Colorado. I live in Wichita Falls. But we have a portal. That's amazing to me. What would my grandparents think that I have this big screen and its only purpose is it's tied to a screen in their house? And I will be walking through the living room and hear, that's the boys. And I'll walk over, it knocks, and I go sit there and I punch it, and the boys are there. And Gavin will say, Grandpa, it's time for our Bible lesson. And I'll say, all right. And this last one we did last night from the hotel was on it's harder for a rich man to go through heaven than a camel to go through the eye of the needle. And I said, you're going to be so tempted by stuff. You pack enough stuff on yourself, you can't go through the gate. Can you imagine how much stuff Solomon had? Well, we're going to look at him as he goes through his search for meeting. And in Ecclesiastes 1 verse 1, it says, the words of the preacher. The Hebrew word for preacher is koheleth. And what that means is, I was going through doing my word study. What it means is it means you take the wisdom from this situation, and this situation, and this book, and this book, and this reference, and this person, and you apply it to real life situations. Now that's what a preacher ought to do. Go to God's Word and take that. But make sure you bring it to today and say, this is how this affects us today. Because if you don't, you haven't done the job of preaching. You've done the job of reading, studying, and having a historical understanding. But it's not transformative until you bring it over here. And so he said, I'm the preacher. I'm the one that's going to gather all this stuff up. There's another word for wisdom that's interesting. It's wisdom in couplets. It's called, there's a book called Proverbs. You know who wrote it? The one who gathered wisdom and put it in a book. And he said, that was my great job in life, he thinks. And he expresses his frustration after all he studied about wisdom and all those things in verse 1 through verse 11. Then he lets us know his true quest in Ecclesiastes 1, 12 through 13. He says, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He says, I turned all this wisdom God gave me and tried to apply it to this world, and all I can say is, and let's go ahead and quote him the right way, it is an unhappy business. It's hard. Sorry, yeah. This is just complex. It's frustrating. You can do it right one day. Something in your situation turns. You do the same thing right again, and it's not right anymore. It's just a frustrating experience. And he says, my wisdom tells me that. In verse 16 through 18, he said, I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me. That includes his dad, David. And my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom, and to know madness, and to know folly. I perceive that this also is but striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. When somebody comes to me for marriage counseling, or when they come to me for their drug problem or something like that, I always sit there and go, this is so easy. Don't start doing that. But it's too late for that wisdom. You have to deal with all the life that has been broken after that. You have to deal with all the problems that came. And as you sit there and you look at it, you realize this is complicated and it's hard. Right now, I'm counseling about 31 addicts. You know how many of them are just the same? None of them. If somebody comes to you and said, I'm an expert in helping people over their addictions, just go ahead and laugh in their face, because they know they're wrong. It's always different. Solomon said, I've tried with everything in me to apply wisdom to this world, and somehow it's not working. It's not what it should be. In Ecclesiastes 1, Solomon shares with us a few bitter truths, 4 bitter truths about this life. First is, without God, life is futile and meaningless. Without God, it just doesn't mean anything. It doesn't have the same meaning to it as it does with God. Without God, history continually repeats itself. See, wisdom ought to make us not make the same mistake again. I was teaching a class on addiction the other day, and I said, 1 John 3 talks about addiction. It talks about a sin that you become in the practice of. And it doesn't have anything to do with drugs or alcohol or any specific thing. But have you not ever had one sin you seem to commit too often? I do. And it's because I'm not applying God's wisdom to it. Because with God, you can answer those things. Without God, you just continue to make the same stupid mistakes over and over again. He says, without God, there is no answer for the problems life throws at us. The other day, something interesting happened. I like to watch Jeopardy. I really like it when they have something that I'm good at on the board. But I like to watch Jeopardy. And my parents love to watch Jeopardy. They just couldn't answer the questions at the end. But they love that show, so I love it too. And this deal, it was amazing. There was this one category, and no one got one answer right on that category. They would get, it was the last one, last 5 questions, and they go through those, and they all just sit there silent going. And I don't know that I would have done well either on Egyptian rulers. You can't just say Pharaoh, because they were all Pharaoh, but they would say, oh, this is it. So I would just be going, Tutankhamun? No. Ramesses? No. Because I don't know much about that. Well, they didn't either. And they were all just sitting there. And I thought, sometimes we just don't have an answer. We haven't been there, we haven't done that, we just don't have an answer. And he says, sometimes in life, even with all the wisdom in the world, I don't know the answer. And without God, I couldn't know the answer. And then fourth, without God, we can never know enough to make it all make sense. Wouldn't it be great if you got to the point where you learned it all? Well, I understand from a smart guy named Thomas Edison that by the time you learn the answer to every question, they change all the questions. And that's true. He said, this is the bitter truth about this. It's meaningless. Repeats itself. There's no answers. And even if you know the answer, you can't make it make sense. That's a pretty dark thing. So he tries to fix it. And we're going to go through a list of 10 things he did to fix his problem. First one is he took in every kind of pleasure. And it didn't work. That's Ecclesiastes 2, 1 and 2. Verse 3, he used alcohol and intoxicating substances to help him really understand life. How do you think that worked out? Not very good. Number 4, he did great building projects. He said, maybe if I make these monuments, maybe if I make these huge places, then my life will have meaning. And I know there are people that tried that. Whenever I was in Chicago, we were going down this river cruise, and they were just finishing putting all the gold pieces on Trump Tower. And someone said, President Trump said he wanted to make a building so perfect that his name would live forever. You just can't make a building like that. That's just not the way it works. You could say, well, what about the Eiffel Tower? It's named for Eiffel. Okay, tell me about him. All right, well, I really don't know who that is. Yeah, he built a tower. A really cool tower that they were supposed to tear down in 6 months. Did you know that? It's for a World Fair. Great building projects. He said, I planted so many vineyards. I have planted so much stuff growing up on a farm, and never did I say, well, that really gives me a lot of meaning. Never happened to me. He created beautiful parks with trees and water. He beautified the world. That wasn't the answer to the problems he faced. He accumulated servants, wealth, possessions, herds, and flocks. I decided I'd just get everything I could get. I would own it. And it didn't give me the meaning I was looking for. You could have great entertainment. The kings of that time had a historian who would come and read the story of your life if you called for them. And then they had entertainers that would come and sing for you. He talked about people who were singers. Maybe if I'm distracted by entertainment enough, my life will understand and I will have meaning. He had many concubines. I don't really want to go into what concubines are, but they are women who have one purpose, and that's to please you sexually. Somebody was telling me they lived just like the wives and all. No, they didn't. It's in other cultures they called it the harem of the king. That turns out that did not even fix his problems. Universal fame didn't fix your problem. Indulging in everything you desire, verse 10, doesn't fix your problems. See, the world is trying all these things. Well, if I became a big movie star, you've got more problems than you did when you started. But if I had lots of buildings on a lot of different properties, yeah, well, that's not going to work out great for you. But what if I had great entertainment? Somebody told me the other day, we live in the golden age because we have television. And I was going, oh man, if this is the golden age, that's crazy. I think it was probably much more a golden age when they were putting the first TVs in the house and people were turning them on going, oh, that's crazy. Because now, TV is just like a droning thing in the background a lot of times in life. Those kind of things don't give you meaning. But He is, by the end of our journey, going to tell us what gives you meaning. In Ecclesiastes 3, we see the source for having true meaning in this world. And He does it in a beautiful way. He's telling us there's something above the world that is in control of everything that happens and when it happens. And this was a great song years ago, but let's read Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time for keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Solomon says all these things happen all the time. These are the things that happen to us in this life. And we are caught up into doing all these things and being a part of all these things and focusing on all these things. But what we have to realize is where He started. That above it all, there is a God of heaven who's in control. This is where he starts turning his mind towards what's right and godly. He said, all this stuff I did didn't work. I know a woman, because she was talking to me the other day, she has 212 pairs of shoes. And I said, well, you don't know. Maybe 213th pair is the one that makes you happy. And she said, well, I like shoes. And she goes, but now we're having financial problems as a family and we don't know what to do. And I said, be a shoe salesman. Yeah, I'd do that. And I said, well, what does your husband collect? And she said, oh, he would not want me to say. And I said, come on. And she says, he buys all this sports memorabilia and it's all over his house. And I was a little sad because I have sports memorabilia in my house. But I said, how much of that would it take to be happy? Maybe one more piece will do it. And she goes, no, they don't make us happy. And I said, it also doesn't give you quality of life. You've got real credit card issues. They owed like $148,000 in credit cards. And I said, Solomon would have said, oh, I've been there. I thought maybe that would give me meaning. But it doesn't give you meaning. I was asked the other day if I ever, when I was in my 50s, decided I wanted to buy a real expensive sports car. Because this guy said, you know, all of us men, when we're in our 50s, we all want a very expensive sports car. And I said, no, I drive a really old pickup. And to me, in my world that I grew up in, it's a little different than this guy's world. He grew up and all the big brands were like these major clothes things. Mine was Carhartt. That was a big brand. Columbia Magellan, all these other kind of clothes. And I said, what, yours was sports cars. Ours was a really cool old pickup. That was the top thing. And I said, and it's good because mine's a lot cheaper. But those kind of things don't really make us happy. And he talks about that. He gives us the ultimate truth in chapter 3, verse 9 through 11, and then down in verse 14. And that is the people who are satisfied and the people who find meaning in life understand a very simple universal truth. God is in control of time and the laws that govern our world here. If we will honor God, life will be so much easier for us. It'll be manageable for us. That's such a simple thing to say. It can be a challenge to keep in mind at all times. We do what's right in God's eyes despite this world. Why? Because God is ultimately in control. I love what he says in verse 14. He has placed eternity in our hearts. He's placed a part of our hearts that is looking for him, that is trying to find him, that's trying to figure out a way to get him involved in our lives. And when we involve eternity in our lives, we find our true source of meaning. In this world, my wife just texted me and said, how's it going? I'll tell her, well, it was going good till you texted me. She texted me the same thing she does every morning that I'm speaking somewhere. She sends me a text and it basically says this: it's so exciting that you get to speak again. It's so exciting that God is able to use you that way. And she said, I'm envious of those who will listen. And I thought, boy, I married well. I really married well. Then I thought, when she does stuff, I really ought to text her something really cool, but I always forget. Solomon closes Ecclesiastes 3 by reminding us of three important truths in verse 15 through 21. The first one is, God has been with those living under trials through all the past. Do you ever wonder why the Bible is the way it is? And it starts with this bizarre history stuff on all these people. It tells us the story of people like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It tells us the story of Joseph. It tells us the story of Ruth and Esther. It tells us about Daniel and the lion's den. It tells us about all these things. It tells us all of these stories inside the Old Testament because he's trying to teach us how to live life. And Solomon says, if we pay attention, we'll do that. And he had the perfect object lesson. He was David's son. Well, I'm also a son of David. Different kind of guy, farmer. But we live through our stories. But those stories are given for a reason. God wrote the Bible the way he did for a reason, so that we could look back in there and go, I see what Joseph did. I should stand up for my morality the way he did in Potiphar's house, all those things. Second thing is, God is with us who are being tested in this wicked world. God's right there with us. In my lesson, I was teaching the little fellas, my grandsons. I told them about this time where a guy named Ephraim told me that after school, he was going to beat me within an inch of my life. I don't know how he knows where the inch is. I don't know anything about the concepts, but I was terrified. I was a small 7th grader and he was a huge junior in high school. And something happened, and it was something happened in the cafe. Oh, he coughed and milk came out his nose. And so I made a joke about it. And he said, I'm going to get you for that. When school's over, come out those front doors and I'm going to beat you within an inch of your life. And I said, well, it shouldn't be hard. You're twice my size. And he said, you're not funny. We'll get outside and you'll be out there. So after school was over, I was sitting there going, I don't want to go outside. He's going to get me. And yet, if I go out one of the other doors, people are going to say, oh, he was scared. He was running away. And I was sitting there going, oh. So I walked outside those front doors and was looking at him. And when I walked out, it was like the Red Sea. Everybody parted, and Ephraim was on the other side. And I was standing up there on the steps. I start walking down the steps, and then I hear puckada, 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 puckada. And I thought, that's Dad's pickup. And I look over, Dad parks, he gets out, he comes walking up, and he said, son, you ready to go to work? I want to go to work so bad, Dad. I just want to work. If I could just work more, it would be so incredible. And so I go and I get in the pickup, and I find out later that my friend Myron Bruce, who has been my friend forever and 6 weeks, we were in the baby class together, he called Dad and said, Chris is going to get whooped. And so Dad shows up. And when my father entered the scene, my problems were over. That's what Solomon says is true of us. When he enters, the problems are over. I can remember when we were having our first son, Alan, they said there may be a problem with his lungs, and Brenda and I freaked out. Brenda actually handled it better than I did, but I really freaked out. I was upset. I didn't know what to do. There was nothing I could do. But then I heard my dad at the end of the hall go, as he was walking down. And I thought, Dad'll fix it. And he came in and he said, son, these people spend all their life learning how to handle this problem. You go take care of your wife. Everything's better when the Father's in the picture. And everything's better when we look to God. And then God will come in judgment, and the righteous and the wicked, that'll be obvious. We're all going to understand it by and by. The final day of judgment is going to put everything in perspective. I can't wait for that day, because all these people who have denied Christ forever will be bowing their knee and admitting that He is King of Kings, Lord of Lords. It'll be a great day. So what's the meaning of life? It's surviving because you turn to your Father and He gets you through. And then someday He'll just take you home and we won't have this world anymore. And that's what Solomon's teaching us inside this first third of his book. He's going to get more bright and cheerful as he goes. He's not going to spend so much time on all the mistakes that he made. But it's where he has to start. Because till we understand how much he could mess up his life, we'll never understand how joyous it is that he became a God-controlled person. And God gave him his meaning. Let's have a prayer, and then there will be a short break. I think a 10-minute break. I really appreciate you being here. I'd talk to an empty room, but it's funner this way. Let's pray together. Dear Father, love you so very much, and Father, just so thankful for your word and the stories that are told, and the times when Bible characters seem to just be there and they speak to us and they become real to us, and we realize that we're not reading through a storybook, we're reading through a historical document of the people of God through time. Father, we need to learn. Father, I know that all of us here face challenges in this life. Help us to realize that our Father is approaching, that you live inside of us, that through Jesus you walk in front of us, and you, Father, you look over all creation and all time at once. We're so grateful that you're with us as we try to manage our lives. Father, we're grateful for Solomon. He showed some real honesty here. He told us everything he did wrong in order that we not make those same mistakes. Father, help us to listen to his wisdom. It's in the name of Jesus that we pray. Amen. All right, let's take a little break. I understand you can go get tea and things. Okay, we're going to start up again. I said we were going to start. Don't hurt my feelings. I love this part of the text. Now, I love the last part the most. We're going to be looking at chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7. And he's going to challenge us to find a better way of life. And he's going to really focus on that word better over and over and over again. And I think it's an important word because what it says is living this way is this, but living this way is better. And I never understood the importance of that until I got a little older. And I realized that there is no perfect, there is no best in this world. That's reserved for heaven. But we can learn what is better. And he tells us a bunch of things that it's better to do. But first he deals with some things that really bother him. And being Solomon, I can see why these things bother him. He points out three things about our world. First, in verse 1 and verse 2 of chapter 4, he talks about how the poor are oppressed. They shed tears, but no one around them really seems to care. Verse 1 and 2 says, "Again I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors there was power, and there was no one to comfort them. And I thought the dead who are already dead are more fortunate than living who are still alive." He goes, there are people who are oppressed and have nothing, and nobody helps them. It makes their life untenable. It makes it something they can't live with. It'd almost be better if they were just dead than alive because they're in this situation. And he's going to talk later about the better way of living is people who have things share them with other people. That's the better. Jesus taught it through stories like the Good Samaritan story and other. Solomon says, I look at the world around us and there's some people who have all the stuff and there's some people who have no stuff. The people with stuff should help the people with no stuff. And he's going to talk about that again here in just a second. In chapter 4, verse 4, and then 7 and 8, he talks about how the wealthy are selfish. Now remember, he's the wealthiest, so he knows. They compete with one another to see who can gain the most wealth and possessions. My dad used to always tell me we weren't trying to keep up with the Joneses. That was a common saying to him. And one day I finally asked him, I said, Dad, the Herberts live on this side, the Walkers live on this side, the Watsons live over there, and the McPhersons live behind us this way. Where did the Joneses live? And he said, let me explain this to you, son. We have a travel trailer for going to livestock shows and things when you go show your pigs. When you go play sports, we take the RV and we go and we're there with you. He said, we bought one and no one else around us had one. And within 2 years, everyone had one that was bigger than the one we have. And he said, that's what we do. That's what we do in life. And I said, what about the people who can't afford an RV? And he said, I don't know what they do. Fortunately, we've never been in that position. I love helping homeless people because many times they're the most honest people I meet. And some of them have high ethics. They just don't have stuff. I'll give you an example. I used it yesterday as well. This man and this woman came up to me. We have this thing called the Sunshine House. The 4 congregations in Wichita Falls all work together. Imagine that. All the churches working together to provide a place where you can always get food, you can always get clothing and all those things. This young lady, I have no idea how old she was because I'm not about to ask her. I would guess she was in her mid-20s. She came up and said, we have a problem. Me and my boyfriend are really in love, but we know that you should not have sex unless you're married. And I thought, wow. And she said, we want to be married, but we don't have the money to be married. So we don't know what to do. And all of our friends tell us, just sleep together. It's no big deal. But we believe that's against what God wants. So you're the preacher here. They all sent us over to you. What are we supposed to do? And I said, let's have a wedding. But you have to go through 13 counseling sessions with me to be married. That's my rule with everyone that comes to me for a wedding. You go through 13 sessions. And I think that kind of thing is essential. And you know, in the state of Texas, they will take the cost of the license down to almost nothing if you'll get counseling first. Yeah, they're in Texas. Yeah, isn't it awesome? What a smart thing. So I said, you come and I will help you with this. And we're also going to, at the same time, my wife and a couple of other ladies are going to teach you skills you're going to need to know to be a good wife. And some of us men are going to take Todd and we're going to teach him some skills he needs to have to be a good husband. One of our men taught him to be a woodworker, and now he builds cabinets. And she's learned how to cook meals from scratch. She spent her life begging for hamburgers from McDonald's. She's always stayed outside the McDonald's. Well, now she can make a complete meal. She knows how to cut up a chicken. She knows stuff that a lot of people don't know anymore. So I was really impressed. But anyway, we would sit there and we'd have those counseling sessions. And then I told them, I'm so excited that you're thrilled to follow what God says, but you haven't obeyed the gospel. And so we talked about the gospel, and they were both baptized into Christ. We were back at the Sunshine House, and I said, let's see if we have nice clothes for people so they can have job interviews. Because I really want everybody to have a job. It's just one of those things. And so went back in there, and one of the ladies came up, and she said, Chris, someone just brought in a wedding dress and gave us a wedding dress. And I said, they did? And she goes, yes, it's a size 12. And I said, is that like a medium? I don't understand girls' sizes. That 12, it's a 12? Does that mean a 12-year-old wears it? I don't know. Anyway, so I was looking at it going, my wife then would wear a 61. Is that what she would wear? So I was sitting there looking going, I don't understand. And so I went up to the young lady and I said, this is going to sound weird. We have a wedding dress. And she goes, is it in a size 12? I said, is that your size? And she said, yes. And I said, it's a size 12. And she said, okay. And I was sort of thinking, what are the odds someone bring? This is the first wedding dress we'd ever had. It was the right size. So I went and got it and showed it to her, and it had like pearls sewn into it and stuff. My wife made this Chanel thing. I'm not even sure what that stuff is. But she made it because it was a little low cut, so she built this stuff on top of it. She called it tooling. And I know what tools are, but it's not that. So anyway, she was putting all that together, and I was working with the guy. We went in and we found a suit that fit him. We found a nice dress shirt. We found this horrible tie that he thought was so great. Blue suit, green and orange tie, but he got to pick it. Found him a pair of cowboy boots, and I told him, if you get married with cowboy boots on, the marriage will last. And so he said, okay. So we have all of our stuff going there, and we go there, and then after they get to that point, he has now got a job building cabinets. She has a job working at Chili's in the kitchen. They're going to put their life together. We went and found them this house. You have to get them a house that they can make payments on. And this house had a hole in the floor. And when I first walked in, I was looking up saying, well, this is a nice house. I almost stepped into it. Someone grabbed me from behind. I would have gone right down and through the floor. So we fixed all that up. We got the house all fixed up for them, put them in the house. But we had the wedding ceremony there at the Sunshine House. And I got real emotional. I said, it does me so much good to see someone that wants to do it God's way. She had never been in a church building before, but she just knew that was the way because she had a grandmother when she was a little girl who told her the rules. And she was shocked to find out that God's rules and Grandma's rules matched. And I got to call her grandmother and tell her we were going to send a bus ticket and get her to come to the wedding because she raised this young lady. And she had been a member of the church for 42 years. And she came in and she said, how did you find her? And I said, she came in, told me that she couldn't have sex before marriage. So I told them we would have a wedding if they did this counseling. And she said, that's so amazing. And I said, no, what's amazing is what you said to a 5-year-old girl became her creed for the rest of her life. And I said, I find that to be amazing. Sometimes we look at people who don't have anything and we make value judgments. Sometimes we look at people that have too much stuff and we make value judgments. Solomon's saying the difference is the poor have to really have something amazing happen before they can come out of where they're at. And the wealthy tend to want to get more and more and more and more. And you can't tell me that's not the way it works. And I have lived in rural Africa, lived in Eastern Europe, different places, and I have been in cultures where way, way more people are poor, below the poverty line, than there are anyone above it. In fact, missionaries are usually above the poverty line. Everybody they preach to is under it. You know what we do in this country? The world poverty line is $8,000 a year. We will not allow anyone in this country to live under the poverty line. And I'm sort of grateful for that. I think that's a good thing. But we still have this same problem Solomon's talking about. But it's really important to me when I go out and talk to people that people realize that morality is not only for the comfortable. It's for everyone. But he does have a critical thing to say in verse 5 and verse 6 about the poor. He said, I find that the poor generally don't want to work. We have a group that wants to keep everything, and we have a group that does not work for anything. And he said, as long as the world is like this, the world won't work. It just won't work. Something's got to happen to change it. And I believe Christianity is a big part of that change. The world's not fair. The world's not right. I was preaching a meeting in a community called Charlottesville in Virginia. It became famous for about 7 days when the Ku Klux Klan came and filled the streets. It's hard to get people to pay attention to your lessons when the Ku Klux Klan is filling the streets. I said, I don't want to live in a world like this, where two different groups of people are sitting there screaming at each other all the time. And yet that's the world that we live in sometimes. All of these kinds of things make Solomon pessimistic and depressed. He says in chapter 4, verse 2 and verse 3, it makes life hardly worth living. 13 through 16, he says, it seems better to be poor in prison than to be rich, be a rich but foolish king. He says, in some ways, it's better to be poor than to be me, to be the king. He says that in the end, verse 16, it doesn't really seem to matter who you are. The world is broken no matter which side you're on. And I think that's true. You know, an amazing thing happened. I was reading this deal of statistics. Did you know that there is a people group that surpassed teenagers in suicide? It's the ultra-rich, millionaires and billionaires per capita. What would they have to kill themselves for? I mean, they've got all the stuff. Well, if stuff was what gave you meaning, they'd be fine. But they don't. I remember listening to, y'all remember H. Ross Perot? My dad was a state representative in Texas, and H. Ross Perot wanted to speak to the leadership of Texas on how to get out of a financial mess. And you ought to be grateful he did that, because Texas has run at a surplus every year since he gave that talk. They were at a great deficit. And he told them, balance your checkbook. He told them some very simple little points. And I remember thinking that's really great. He said, the wealthy are miserable. We look for ways to try to find joy, but we're miserable. He goes, sometimes I think it'd be better to be as poor as you could be than to have all of this trouble. And everybody sitting in the crowd was thinking what I was thinking. Why don't you just give it to me? I'll take it. I think I can live under that pressure. But there is a pain that comes with both things. There are 5 ways to make it through life, found inside this text, chapter 4 and chapter 5. Ecclesiastes 4, verse 9 and verse 12 says, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, and has not another to lift him up. Again, if 2 lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man may prevail against one who is alone, 2 will withstand him. A 3-fold cord is not easily broken. We've got problems. Poor got problems, rich got problems, everybody's got problems. What's an answer? Well, the first answer is it takes a village. It takes people helping you. I love this country because I was a missionary. When I showed up in the former Soviet Union in Ukraine, this woman, she was so sweet. Her name was Mary. She was such a sweet lady. She had been a tank buster in World War II. What they did was they built giant trenches across the roads, and the thought was that when the Nazis came, they would drive into the ditch, and that would stop them. That's not what happened. What happened is they came up to those ditches, went and killed men and filled up the ditch with them, and then they took the women and the children to Berlin and imprisoned them. She said, I can't tell you what happened to me, but she had scars where there was patches of skin that didn't match because they were practicing medicine on them and different things. She said, my pelvis was completely destroyed by the rapes that happened. And she talked about things, and those were the parts she was willing to talk about. She said there's a lot of it she wouldn't talk about that was too horrible. And I remember sitting there looking at her going, wow, Sister Skaleva, that's horrible. And she said, I was sitting there cowering down in my prison cell because when you would hear boots in the hallway, generally meant you were going to be raped. But what you'd do is you would get as close to the door as you could, thinking that they may look in and go, oh, no one's in there, and then they'd walk to the next room. And she goes, you really didn't care about the next room. They had to take care of themselves. You just didn't want to get hurt that day. And then one day she heard, bah, 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 bah. And she goes, it was a whole bunch of people running up and down those wooden halls. And she goes, we were terrified. We were all screaming. Because if there's that many people out there, we're going to be destroyed. She said the door started to shake. And then it popped. The piece of metal locking it popped. And he goes, the door flies back. And this giant man comes in. And he looks at me, and she thought, well, he'll kill me. He's huge. There's no way I can fight back against this guy. And he bent down and picked her up and lifted her up, and her head was by his shoulder, and she said, the Americans showed up. See, when she went into prison, we weren't in the war yet. It took us getting hit in the mouth in Hawaii before we joined the effort, and they thought they weren't going to win because America wasn't going to come help. And she goes, well, here they are. And he took her outside, this giant man. And this was the first African American she'd ever seen. And she did not know what was going on. She said he was built like a giant bear. And he carried me out. And she goes, his hands were bigger than my head. And he laid me down and he talked real soft to me. And then he reached into this pack and he gave me something that I didn't know what it was, but I loved it. It was a Hershey's bar. Gave her their Hershey's bar. Those were inside all their kits. So he gave her a Hershey's bar, and then he gave her some potted ham. Blech. And then he gave her some different things. And he kissed her on the forehead and ran back into the building. They were put in cattle cars and hauled north, and she ended up in Ukraine, dumped off in Donetsk, Ukraine. The way we met was, I was walking down the street, and my Russian teacher had told me, you need to practice. Go find someone you can speak to. So I sat down beside this woman, who later I found out was named Mary. She's selling sunflower seeds. You don't make a ton of money off sunflower seeds, but she was selling her sunflower seeds. She'd fold these pieces of newspaper, making them like a cone, fill it up, sell that for what in our money was about 7 cents. So I told her, I will give you more if you'll just talk for me for a minute. I said, I will pay so that we'll have some time where you won't have to worry about selling. We can talk. And I spoke, and she laughed, and she said, your Russian is like that of a child. And I said, thank you very much. I've worked real hard on it. But I sat down. Извините, пожалуйста. Меня зовут Christopher Davidovich. I am he. And we would go through, and she said, where are you from? And I said, I'm from Texas. And she goes, oh, Texas. She said, did you ever have a horse? And I said, yes, ma'am. Have guns? Way more than anybody ought to have. Yeah, we got those. She goes, did you ever shoot animals? And I said, yes. Did you ever shoot people? No. And she patted me on the arm and said, good for you. Because I think she thought we all were just shooting each other. So she thought that was nice. But she said, I've been waiting. I've been waiting here for you. I knew if I could just hold out, an American would come. And you'd take care of me. And I said, yes, ma'am. She became a member of the Lord's Church, a wonderful lady in this little congregation in Mariupol, Ukraine, another town that's been on the news for getting blown up. But her favorite thing was sweet table. When somebody had a birthday, we would have cake and tea. Oh, she loved sweets. She was like a maniac for sweets. But she would sit there and she would eat a ton of cake. We had to bring extra just for her. But she said, it must be wonderful to live in America where everyone helps everyone all the time. And I said, oh no, don't get this wrong. It's easier for us to come save you than it is to save one another. Somehow. And she said, I just assume a Christian nation. And I would look at her and go, we like it. We like the idea of it. But the truth is, I was born into a much more Christian nation than the one I live in today. The Ukrainians made it by helping one another. They're surviving that war because they help one another. There are people in their house that have like 60 people staying in their house with them, and they're feeding them because you only survive by helping one another. And then I was thinking, that's really the way I grew up. If I broke down on the side of the road, there would be like 16 old men fighting to get there first so they could be the one to help me. And I love that, but it's the way we do. When I was 4 years old, a preacher named Marshall Keeble came to speak in Sunray, Texas. It was his third to the last gospel meeting. It lasted 2 weeks. Can anyone else remember 2-week gospel meetings? Yikes! That was just amazing. But anyway, so it was like the third to the last day, and he's talking about this passage. And he gets one stick, and he calls this guy up, this big, strong guy, and he said, I need you to break this stick. And he breaks it. I said, wow. And then he picked a little bitty, scrawny guy. He said, you. And that was me. He said, come up here. And he had 3 branches tied together. He said, now break it. I put it on the pulpit, pushed. I did everything I could not break it. And he said, I want y'all to remember this point. Any one of you can be destroyed, but 3 of you won't. We've got to learn to help each other. May have been the best sermon I ever heard, and I was 4. You think I'd heard a lot better ones since. But he said that's the key, and quoted this passage. In Ecclesiastes 6, Solomon keeps expanding on how we live for God. He says, we should depend on God for joy. Verse 1 and verse 2 of chapter 6, fortune, money and possessions does not give you joy. Number 2, family does not bring you true joy. Sometimes family brings pain. Sometimes family is hard. And it's okay that we know that. My wife would tell you that sometimes being married to me is hard. Actually, she wouldn't tell you that. She tells me that, but not you. Third, fullness of years does not bring joy. We all want to live a long time, but living a long time comes at a price. I was preaching the other day on 2 Corinthians 4:16 through chapter 5, verse 11, about how the reasons why our bodies break down is to cause us to look forward to a heavenly home. And I was up there and I started laughing, going, I used to not really understand this. I got it. My back hurts. I've got my contacts. I have to change them about twice a year. I do all this stuff, and I thought, yeah, farther along. But I was going, I know now why I have that pain. I groan in this world so that I will not be attached to this world. I will look on. And Solomon teaches that same basic lesson. But a fortune, that doesn't give you joy. You know what joy is? Joy is not happiness. Somebody the other day in a marriage retreat, they came up to me and said, I just want you to know I'm not happy in my marriage right now. And I said, have you talked to Brenda? She can identify with you. She's probably not happy either. And she said, I figured y'all had the perfect marriage. And I said, it's close. But she married me. She deserves problems. But we were sitting there and we were joking around about it. But I said, honestly, truly, joy is different than happiness. I think we chase happiness. But happiness is temporary. Joy is eternal. Happiness means that everything in you feels good. Wow. Joy means you know that there is someone who can take care of you. When we know we're cared for, we rejoice. We are able to have joy. Knowing that God is there for us brings us great joy. I want you to know, I joke around, but I have never had a day without joy in my marriage. I know my wife will always be there. And when she passes from this life, I hope we've already had my funeral, because I don't want what that's going to feel like. But he says, we think these physical things are what's going to give us ultimate joy. But if you don't have God taking care of you, you cannot truly have joy. And if you want joy, you've got to include God in it. And I think we would all agree that he makes a good point. In Ecclesiastes 7, he talks about better things. Verse 7, verse 1, a good reputation or a good name is better than fine perfume. It's better. Now, fine perfume, good thing. Good reputation, What he uses is a great thing. He talks about the fragrance of your reputation when you walk into a room. That's better than having a physical perfume. And that's true. I remember once I got called for a personal foul in football. I grabbed a guy by the back of his shoulder pads and just jerked him backwards. He fell down, really, really hurt him. That was against the rules. And so I got a 15-yard penalty put on me. And when I showed up at home, he said, next time that happens, we're taking my name off the back of your jersey. You protect your name. And I was sitting there going, it's not a big deal, Dad. It was 15 yards. Oh, man, it was a big deal. And he said, you put Swinford on your back, you better realize that I'll be watching. And our name is valuable like that. He says the day of death or the end of life is better than the day of birth or the beginning of life in verse 1. Think about if you have a relationship with God, what's better? That last day is better. I've been there with so many Christian people in their last moments. There's nothing better. There's nothing that can touch it. We fear death, but that final moment when we pass from this life and we open our eyes in what's to come, it's better than entering this life. He does this cool thing with birth. In Ecclesiastes, he uses birth to talk about the day you're born. And birth in Hebrew means a complete radical change. And that's the ultimate radical change. But just imagine, you're inside your mom's belly and you hear whoosh, 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 whoosh. You're in a liquid environment. You're in warmth all the time, 98.6 degrees. You've got all this stuff going on, but basically your world is that big. And then one day, the bones of your mother begin to spread a little. And you begin to be sucked down further. And your whole world is starting to change. You have no idea what's going on, assuming we have thought in those days. And then suddenly you're born. And you feel the touch of your mother. They lay you on her breast and you can still hear whoosh, 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 but it's different. You see color. You feel air blow on you. All these things. And how do babies respond? Because it's so different. But it's so much more beautiful. But go to your last day. You have lived in a world of color. You've lived in a world of air. You've lived in a world of sound. You've lived in a world of family. You've lived in a world of friends. You've lived in a world of so many things that we hold so dear. And in those last moments, things get a little dark. And you wake up and we're born into something so much more beautiful than anything we ever had in this life. That day's better. I told Dad, I said, when you get there, I want you to come back and tell me everything that's going on so I'll know what I should preach on Sundays. And he said, I'll get there, but I won't be able to come back and tell you. And he said, I just know this. Opening my eyes to my Father, to the Christ who died for me. There's nothing in this life that can touch it. So we have to realize we see this differently than the world, but the day of death is better than the day of beginning. Funerals honoring the dead is better than festivals and celebrations honoring life. When our son Alan was born, we had like 40 family members outside in the hall. I'm in there with Brenda, and we are both pretty freaked out by the whole thing that's going on here. But it's my job to go give updates. So the doctor would say 6 centimeters, and we would go, we didn't take metrics in school. We have no clue what you're talking. But I would stick my head out and go, 6 centimeters, and you would hear, rah, go back inside. And she'd say, was my mom there? Yes, your mom was right there. And so we would be in there again, and they would tell us things that would happen. And then Alan cried after he was born. I throw back the door, and I say, it's a boy. His name is Alan. Pandemonium. How should we feel when a child of God goes to heaven? It's a better day. So many people never choose God. And so that last day, that funeral, is so much better than our first day. Because it's when we come together to honor someone who's gone to be with God. He's sort of turning upside down our typical thoughts. He says sorrow, or being empathetic towards others, is better than laughter. One reason is when you are in sorrow, you're focused on someone else, helping them. When you have your great moment of celebration, it's more about you. And that's his meaning. Better is it to focus on someone else than it is to just focus on your own feelings. Criticism, or direction, is a better word. Verse 5 and verse 6. From a wise man is better than praise from a fool. I had to build a doghouse. My dad gave me all the materials and I had to put it together. It was a mess. But my best friend was sitting there with me and he said, that's the greatest doghouse I've ever seen. And I said, well, thank you. Dad came in and said, let's tear it apart. Chris, you start by getting your foundation firm, making sure it's level. Then you go to this and you go to this and you go to this. In the end, I can tell you which doghouse is better. The voice of wisdom makes a better difference than the voice of the fool who was there telling me I was the greatest builder of all time. Finishing something is better than starting something. Ever known someone that's great at starting things? He really needs someone who can finish things. Patience, or focus on finishing the race, is better than pride, than reflecting on success. Wisdom is better than wealth. Verse 11 and verse 12. Wisdom's a great word. There's 3 things in Scripture. There's knowledge. Knowledge is the gathering of information. My wife, the librarian, is the champion of gathering information. She can find, before we ever go on a trip, she knows everything that's going to happen the whole time on the trip. She's good. That gathering of information is really important because you don't have the other things without it. But the second thing is understanding. Being able to remember and recall. Being able to know what you're supposed to do. And then wisdom is knowing the right time and place to use what you've learned. Those 3 things together are big and important. I love that word, knowledge. Its meaning in the Greek is showing it. The word picture being painted is God's mind is a river that goes above our heads. When you begin to gather knowledge, you connect to that river. As you begin to understand, you move to that river. And when you have wisdom, you're living in that river of God. He says it's better to live in it. It's better to have that relationship. Wisdom is better than power. Lots of people can get power. But without wisdom, it's nothing. Without wisdom, it's nothing. So here's the bottom line as a result of Solomon's study of life. Chapter 7, verse 13 through 29. First of all, only God can make straight what man makes crooked. I find that to be an incredible thing to have said. Ecclesiastes 7, verse 13. Consider the work of God, who can make straight what he has made crooked. That's my talk with the little boys tonight, is how you're going to have a crooked path all over. And when you become a child of God, he's going to take that path and he's going to straighten it out. He's going to take all your problems, all your sins, he's going to straighten it out. And that is an important thing to do. verse 18 says, "It is good that you should take hold of this, and from that withhold not your hand. For the one who fears God shall come out from both of them." All the problems you have in life, fearing God will take care of that. Second, enjoy today, for tomorrow is uncertain. Each day is a gift from God. Solomon said it really nice. Jesus says much better in Matthew chapter 6. Talking about don't care about tomorrow and the things of it. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Same message, two different spokesmen. Third, realize that life isn't fair. Sometimes the wicked live long lives and the righteous live short ones. It's not fair. Have you learned it yet? Life isn't fair? I don't see how you learn anything else. I don't even want life to be fair. I would really like better. And that's the way it is with God. He doesn't give me what I deserve. He gives me better. The thought that Jesus hung on the cross of Calvary and took my sin and became sin for me and allowed me to be righteous is the most unfair act of all time. This is extra. You don't have to pay for this part of the class. David and Jonathan switched clothes. It was way back there in Samuel. They switched clothes. This was actually a thing they did a lot then. When you wanted to show how much you loved someone, you switched clothes with them. Jonathan's daddy, Saul, is trying to kill David. And he's trying to convince David that even though his dad, the king, hates him, Jonathan still loves him. So he takes him into a room and he begins to take off his clothing, and David takes off his, and Jonathan puts on the clothing of the harp-playing shepherd, and David puts on the clothing of the son of the king. And they walk out of the room. And everyone bows to those clothes. And suddenly Jonathan, who spent his life being bowed to, he's just another guy in the room. When it says he made him who knew no sin to be sin, it's the same phrase they use for switching clothes. And we get to wear the perfect clothes of the Son of God. And he wears our sin clothes to the cross of Calvary and kills them there. If that's not your favorite story of all time, then we got trouble. One of my teachers, his name was Norman Gibson. I don't know if anybody else ever even heard of him. He's just a good old-time preacher. All of his stories were, then we put on boxing gloves in school and we all started hitting each other. I said, in school you got to hit each other? That's crazy. But he used to sing this song to us. Oh, the best thing in my life I ever did do. Oh, the best thing in my life I ever did do. The best thing in my life I ever did do was take off the old robe and put on the new. Well, the old robe was spattered and tattered and torn, and the new robe was perfect, had never been worn. Oh, the best thing in my life I ever did do was take off the old robe and put on the new. The other day I was listening to one of my former classmates. They said, what is your greatest accomplishment? And he said, putting on the robe. And I went, oh, I should have said that. It's awesome. But that is our best accomplishment. Realize no one is truly righteous in this world. That's Paul in Romans 3. God created us all righteous, but we all failed, and only the righteous God can make us righteous again. That's the story of Jesus. Amazing. And then be careful about the advice you gather from other people. One of his big themes is the world's wisdom will get you. I was talking to this lady the other day, and it was a class on child rearing, and she said, well, I read this book, and as soon as she said it, I went, oh no, don't read that book. That started back when I was the kid being raised. People had Spock's book, Dr. Spock. He had all this wise information. Did you know he had no children when he wrote that book? You guys were so crazy for listening to him. But now we have 1 million of them. She said, I read a book that says that if you discipline your child, they will never truly be able to love you. And I said, burn that book. Get rid of that book. And I said, Solomon has a completely different take. He demands that we do it. And she said, but what about my book? And I said, it wasn't the book. We need the book. And that's what Solomon would tell us. Be wary of that information from other people. All right, well, you put up with a lot. We got one more third of the book to go, and it is by far the greatest part. Because now he's talking about when he got it all right. He's been talking about when he gets it wrong. He's going to get it right. Let's take a break. Paul right, let's finish this thing out.
He left you floating after you got through with it.
I tell you, isn't it true though? He's got a gift for arranging things and ordering things. And when, yeah, I go speak at about 12 or 13 different events a year. And I try to do 2 gospel meetings. Do you know there are still churches doing gospel meetings? We baptized about 11 at the last one. I don't know why we say they don't work, because
They don't work because we don't do it.
I guess so. But I know that it must have been horrible, because I was growing up when everybody said, oh, these don't work. Do you know there's a congregation in Tennessee that started bus ministry, and they have tripled in size in 7 months? But bus ministry doesn't work. So y'all don't do it.
Big commitment.
Man. Yeah. You know why it was stopped in my home congregation? Those kids on the bus were eating way too much food at potlucks.
Oh, really?
How about that?
Sounds like a good problem to have.
Yeah, I was just going, we go pick them up because they're in poor neighborhoods and all that, and then they want 3 desserts. I grew up we raised our own pork and sheep and cattle. I had 3 kinds of meat at almost every meal. Those kind of kids didn't see meat. And then they'd come to a church potluck, and they had the all-star team of cooks. So anyway, they got in trouble. In the end, everybody got in trouble. Okay, we're going to look at 10 problems for those of us in this world, and then he's going to give us the answer. This is in chapter 8 through chapter 9, and then chapter 10 is the most genius way to write a chapter of the Bible that I know of in Scripture. He does something that's just phenomenal, and I'm excited to get there. But we're going to look at 10 problems first. The first problem we all seem to face is found in Ecclesiastes 8, chapter 8, verse number 1, 16, and 17. We trust in human wisdom. Think about all the things in our life that's giving us human wisdom. I woke up this morning because it's a Saturday morning, and I turned to ESPN because it's Saturday morning, and I can get all my news on the football games that are being played today. And when I went out and sat in my pickup at lunch to hear how the Texas Tech game's going. They were up by 21 points in the first quarter, so I was excited about that. And then I come back in here and all that, and we're going through, I don't know what's going on out there. And there were some big games at noon. But anyway, don't know what's going on. Huh?
What kind of game?
Football games.
What's that?
The only games. If you're not into college football season,
You don't want me in
then
the
you,
land. Because I'm against whoever you're for.
well,
And I don't care who it is.
Bland and I have the same problem. Just be against the University of Texas and you make both of us happy.
No, that's what I'm for. But you're against me.
Yes, a
One of
contrarian.
those guys.
The world only has so many great contrarians, they're called. People that just say, I'm for the other side.
I'm for the other side. He's Mount Rushmore.
There you go. Well,
And I love it.
Well, I like that's the reason I like college sports is the rivalry. I'm rooting for Oklahoma to lose. I live right near the border. I don't know who they're playing, but I'm rooting for them to lose. We trust in human wisdom. And I was sitting there listening to them. They don't know any more about what's going on in a football game than I do. But they make millions of dollars. But I can learn just as much going to Dairy Queen where I grew up and listening to all the old guys talk. But it's dangerous to pay so much attention to human wisdom. When my mom got sick, my dad had to stay home. He had to stay in the house because mom could be a danger to herself. My dad filled his time watching Fox News from 4 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night. And I would sit there and look at him and go, they've already repeated this like 34 times. But he would get so riled up. He would be ready to go storm the castles. He'd be ready to go turn over all the tables. He'd just get so upset. So I was in there one day and I took out my little pad and I was writing him a prescription. I filled it out and handed it to him. And he looked at it and he said, "Son, what is this?" And I said, "Dad, it's saying you get 1 hour of Fox News. That's it. You can pick the hour, but you get 1 hour. Because you are driving everybody nuts because you're so frustrated with they spent too much money in Ethiopia on a well and now everybody's fighting about it. Dad, just be grateful people get water. You don't have to fight all these deals." And so he developed a routine of Gunsmoke, Bonanza, Andy Griffith, Petticoat Junction, which I haven't really seen in quite a while. Gomer Pyle, he would sit there and I would come in and I said, "What's going on, Dad?" And he goes, "Oh, Matt Dillon, that was one of my favorite ones. That's when he gets hurt and he comes," and I was going, this dad is so much better than Angry Dad. But whenever we give ourselves to human wisdom, we're only as good as those people we listen to. And I think we need to watch those things. Second, we have the problem of having to deal with life being unfair. The sinful get treated like the saved at funerals. This bothers him, and it bothers me. Have you ever sat inside a funeral? You're sitting here listening. There's a guy who has never been in the church building one time in his life. He beat his kids. He was horrible. He cheated everybody on business deals. And you're sitting here going, I wonder what it's like now that he's opening up his eyes in heaven. I wonder what, and you're going, are you serious? Is he really saying that? And I talked to people, and like one person, I was having a Bible study with them, they said, well, in the end, everybody's saved because I've been to funerals. And I went, And I know we can't say, boy, it's really hot where he's, we can't do that, but we don't have to put them in heaven. There's parts that are just tough. And we were talking about this one girl asked me a question. She goes, I've got a question about what happens when we die. And I said, okay, I'd love to have this conversation. And she said, since all the babies that die are going to go to heaven, I said, yes. All the small children that die are going to go to heaven, yes. All the aborted babies are going to die and go to heaven, yes. All those with mental diminishment, yes. Won't heaven be primarily babies? And I was sitting there looking at her going, well, you take the babies killed in China alone, it almost matches the funerals in our country. It's an amazing thought. And I said, wow. And she said, I worry about it. And I said, why? And she goes, I was at a funeral before you moved here, and the preacher said that this grandmother was going, and now she was able to rock her 2 grandchildren who died. And she's taking care of them in heaven. And she goes, if there's that many babies, we're going to be taking care of babies all the time. And I said, you can't take funeral theology and apply it to God's Word. But you should be able to. But it's a problem to Solomon. We treat the sinful like the saved. We don't make them feel like there's any difference, so there's no reason for them to respond. He says in Ecclesiastes 8, 12, and 13, though a sinner does evil 100 times and prolongs his life, yet I know that it will be well with those who fear God, because they fear before him. But it will not be well with the wicked, neither will he prolong his days like a shadow, because he does not fear before God. He says we need to make it clear that the righteous are blessed forever, and the sinful had better enjoy this life, because that's all they got. And it's something that bothers him. Here's something else that bothers him. One of the 10 problems we have is we don't always seem to remember and to realize that death could come at any moment. It's true for all of us. I remember being in the hospital and they were talking about my dad dying. And then I looked up at one of the nurses and said, wait, you know what's weird is I could die before him. And she said, no, you seem healthy. And I said, no, I'm driving back and forth late at night and early in the morning. That's so weird. But I don't even think about me dying. I think about them dying. And I think there's a problem, and I should know better. When I was in 7th grade, there was this guy named Walter Williams. He was a star. In 7th grade, he was 6'3" tall. We were never going to lose a game. I was a point guard that had about 40 or 50 assists per game. Because I would just dribble the ball down and throw it up in the middle. And he'd reach up and grab it, turn around and put it in the basket. We'd run back down. He would high-five me. Thank you, Chris. That was a great assist. And I'm going, that's the easiest money in the world. But we were in the showers after beating Borger, which was our big rival. Beat them. And we even prayed that we would beat them, which is sort of weird. But anyway, we're all inside the shower. We're messing around. There's this guy named Victor. Everybody has one. He was a pest all the time. But he would go over there with his towel and wet the end. And then he would come in and smack you with it. And he would bring blisters on you. I mean, he was just lousy about such things. And he thought he was hilarious. Walter told him, if you do that to me, I'll get you. He turns around to Walter and he hits him right about here. And Walter falls down dead. He had an aneurysm in his neck and it blew. And he began to bleed out of the eyes and all that kind of stuff. And we're all sitting there in the shower. He is laying down across the doorway into the showers. And we're just all standing there going. And the coach comes in and says, what happened? And everybody just points at Victor. Victor and his family had to move from our community because they were having people like spray paint on their garage door, murderer. I mean, it was a bad deal. And he shouldn't have done that. But it's something we were doing all the time. It wasn't supposed to kill anybody. And I don't think it was his fault, but I would have had a hard time convincing everybody else. We were there. Finally, they came and they laid towels over him. And then we came up, and the coaches would grab us one by each arm and just pull us over. And we could go get our clothes on. And he said, go ahead and go to class. We all walked outside the door and we just stood there. We didn't know what to do. The ambulance came. They picked him up. They took him off. 3 days later, his mother has those of us that were in the youth group on the basketball team. We are the pallbearers. We're up there. We don't know what that is. We're just sitting up at the front going, oh no. They tell us we have to lift the casket. We can't lift the casket. We're little bitty guys. So our dads came up and grabbed on too. We finally got it all done. We were the best acting kids. Because we really, to that point, had no idea we could die. And suddenly, I listened to the preacher all the time. I was reading my Bible all the time. But kids don't die, and yet we know they do. I did the funeral for my little niece. We need to all understand that death could happen at any time. When I was in my 30s, I thought, well, I can't die now, but when I'm 60, I may just fall over. Now I'm 60 and go, I usually got another 30 or 40 years of this. And there's no guarantees on anything. We need to realize that death is coming. Fourth, we need to see how chaotic the world is because they make wrong choices. Verse 11 and verse 12. The swift do not always win the race. The strong do not always win the battle. The smart do not always acquire the wealth because life's chaotic. Little things happen that change lots of things. And life doesn't really make a lot of sense sometimes. But primarily, life doesn't work well because we make wrong choices, and that changes everything on our path. And then in chapter 9, verse 13 through 18, he stops and he tells a parable. He's going through this nice list, and I love lists. I love them. And then right in the middle, he adds this parable, and this is the parable. Ecclesiastes 9, beginning in verse 13. I have also seen this example of wisdom under the sun, and it seemed great to me. There was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came up against it, besieged it, building a great siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no one remembered that poor man. But I say that wisdom is better than might, though the poor man's wisdom is despised and his words are not thought about. He tells us this story. There's a small village, but apparently they still have walls because the walls were besieged. But they live inside this small village. There's not a lot of people there. And inside this village, there's this old wise guy. And I mean that in the nicest way. He was a very wise person. This king comes up with his major army to fight against him, and somehow the wise man thought of a way to get out. Now I remember one battle that happened at that basic time in history where while the soldiers were all coming in, the people were crawling through the aqueducts and leaving. And then they just ran behind the enemy lines, took their food and supplies, and went into the mountains. He might have had a plan a lot like that. But he says, it's funny, in the end, everybody remembers the warriors, but they don't remember the smart guy that saved the village. And that's something that's wrong, but it's something that's true. I just think, I like parables wherever they're at. I was talking to someone the other day and they said, well, only Jesus used parables. And I said, oh man, you haven't read Jeremiah. You haven't read so many places. Number 5, listening to the wise instead of the foolish seems like the right thing to do. Chapter 10, verse 1 through 15. The wise person, their heart directs them to do right. Their words are gracious and right. The foolish person, their heart directs them to evil. The way they walk shows that they are fools. They're often given authority despite the fact they're fools. They are consumed by their own words. They're exhausting by the simplest task. And yet, we tend to follow the fool and not the wise person. Another problem he sees in society is the non-respect of authority. Isn't there times where you're reading through the Old Testament and you think, oh wait, he's talking about here and now? I was in Washington State. We were planting a church in West Seattle. I teach church planting and evangelism classes. This one team of 4 families was going to West Seattle to build a church. They had tried 3 and they had all died. And we thought, well, we can do it. So went up there, found out why it's so hard. A simple little apartment costs you about $95,000 a year. And I went, oh, this does make it hard. So anyway, we were there and we were going up, we were talking to people in the streets. We went by and we looked at the old building, all those different things. And we got back to our car and the back window was torn out. I had put my computer underneath the wheel well, thinking, well, surely nobody would break in and get it. They got that. Also had my iPad stuck between my seat and the seat next to me where it couldn't be seen. They took that. And I called the police and said, hi, my name's Chris. I'm from Texas. I'm here visiting your lovely city of Seattle. And somebody broke into the car. They broke out the back window. They got in here. They stole my computer and they stole my iPad. And he said, well, can you wait 4 days for us to come take a report? And I said, no, I will be in Texas. And he said, okay, this is what I need you to do. You write out a report. I will copy and paste your report on our letterhead, and you can turn this into your insurance so you can have this done. And I said, what's to stop me from saying they stole a $10,000 necklace? And he goes, well, you can if you want, but we can't get there for 4 days. And so I was talking to him and I said, I just don't understand. This is like $3,000 worth of stuff. Why can't you come? And he said, well, we're a sanctuary city. We have thousands and thousands of thefts every day. We have so many rapes every day, so many burglaries every day. And they are making our police force smaller because we have a group here that wants to defund the police. Can you imagine saying, boy, if we just had less police officers, we'd be more safe? That's just crazy. So anyway, I was sitting there and I said, okay, well, I'll send this to you. And sure enough, about 8 days later, I got exactly what I said on a police report signed by an officer attesting that it was true. And I thought, okay, that is so strange. I can imagine where people take care of it, but I said, I'd really like for somebody to find my computer. And he said, oh, within 30 minutes. It's in this big warehouse. We know where it is. We just can't do anything about it. But they strip it down to its parts and they sell them. And I said, you know where it is? Well, tell me, and I'll go see if I can get my... And he goes, no, it's very dangerous. And he goes, there's people there. We have to be very thoughtful about them. And I thought, the disrespect of authority is killing them. And they don't realize it's their fault. They then in turn blame the police more, and they say, let's defund even more. And they don't know that this is a problem that's going to kill them. But I was going through that and thinking, yeah, Solomon, disrespecting authority makes the world a worse place. And it does. I tell you, I was an Army chaplain. They beat it into our heads to respect authority. Every now and then I'd see someone with bars on his collar and I'd be looking at him going, you're not so smart. And I'd salute him because we had to respect authority. And I think it's a good thing. I wish we'd go back to doing that. 7 is living a lazy life. He says sometimes the roof leaks and the house begins to rot because no one fixes it. Have you ever had that neighbor that just let stuff fall apart? Frustrating. 8, sometimes we have problems because we ignore dangerous situations. In chapter 10, verse 8 through 11, he says, maybe digging a well and then you might fall into it. You might be demolishing an old wall and then a snake might bite you. You might be working in a quarry and then the stones crush you. You might be chopping wood and then the axe may strike you. He's telling us we have to be careful to live a wise life. Then number 9, so the problem is that we are blessed and we don't really enjoy God's blessings. I don't even want to talk about it. But whenever I came back to America and I would hear people say, I'm sorry, we only have the one car, I would go, in most parts of the world you'd go, wow, we got a car. I used to joke with the boys and I'd say, that's an America problem. I didn't get enough meatballs on my spaghetti is an America problem. Should be glad you had something to eat. But what's funny is, after I was back about 3 weeks, I was right back to doing the same thing again. We are so used to being blessed. And you'd think we'd appreciate it more. And we should. And then number 10, there are problems because we don't watch our words. It always comes back. Always gets you. I have to watch your words. He then gives us 4 rules for all people, and then he's going to turn his focus to young people. And since we're all of age, we're going to really enjoy talking about those young people. 4 rules for all people in chapter 11, verse 1 through 8. First thing is, we should all be generous. Secondly, we should not delay in doing what's important. Third, we should realize that we can never truly understand all of what God does, but we can be grateful for it. And fourth, we got to keep sowing the seed regardless. I remember a drought in Moore County. We had 1.25 inches of rain over a 10-month period. It was horrible. We would sit out there and we would go out there and look at the corn we'd planted, and with no water, it doesn't germinate at all. We just had dirt with corn in it. And Dad would go out there and we'd be looking at it and he'd say, well, we did our part. Our job is to plow and plant. If God wants to leave the corn seed there in the ground, that's His part of the job, is He brings life to that seed. But frustrating, hard thing. When we violate these rules, we find real trouble. And then in chapter 11, verse 9 and verse 10, he gives a couple of rules, especially for young people, though all of us can learn. He says, rejoice, O young man, in your youth. Don't you wish, wouldn't you like for a day to have the same strength and agility and all you had when you were young? I'd really enjoy that, and I would appreciate it. But we should do that when we're still young. Let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. His whole last part of this book is, wouldn't it be better if we became faithful as young people? That's his main point. And I love the way he says it and the way he talks about it, because it's genius. And that is Ecclesiastes chapter 12. I want to read for you Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 1 through verse 7. And we are then going to see how Solomon is the wisest guy in the world at that time. I always hesitate to say, I hear people say he was the wisest man of all time. Jesus did walk the earth. I'm a little hesitant about that. But it says Solomon did an incredible thing. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, beginning verse 1. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain, in the day when the keepers of the house tremble, and the strong men are bent, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those who look through the windows are dimmed, and the doors on the street are shut, when the sound of the grinding is low, and one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song are brought low. They are afraid also of what is high, the terrors on the way, the almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper drags itself along and desire fails. Because man is going to his eternal home, and mourners will go out into the streets. Before the silver cord is snapped, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. He says, remember first your Creator. There was this guy once, and I went to him. He was reading Irish poetry. And then he would go over and he'd say what it was. And then he said, I want to read a poem from an Irishman who didn't know he was Irish. His name is Solomon the King. And he read this passage. And he said, that may be the best technical writing he's ever read. And I was going, wait a second, I should know about this. It's clever the way he does this. He says, remember your Creator before your physical life grows hard. Before you grow old, remember before. A lot of congregations I go to and try to help, their main problem is young families aren't involved. Young people aren't involved. All your workers are, 70, 80 years old. It's a horrible thing. Shouldn't we remember when we're young and we have all the energy and all those things? Shouldn't we be remembering back then? He says, before the sun, moon, and stars are dim. He's talking about before your mind begins to struggle, before your mind goes dim. I'm a little nervous about Alzheimer's and dementia since one of my parents had each one of those. And my grandmother had Alzheimer's. I just assume that one of these days Brenda's going to come and I'll be sitting in my chair and she'll say, "So what are you doing?" And I'll say, "I have no earthly idea." Because it's so prevalent in my family. We should do when we're young, because we don't know what's going to happen later. Before the keepers of the house tremble. Keepers of the house for them was the hands. One of our elders has Parkinson's, and he's an architect. It's just torture. It's just torture to watch, because his hands just shake, and he has to draw straight lines, so he has to get his hand going just right to where he can go down and draw that straight line. He did much better when he was younger. Before the strong man is bent. I'm sensitive to this now, but you know, there'll come a day where our back hurts, where it's hard to sit up straight, hard to bend down. It's all hard. We have a 101-year-old guy named Gordon Wallace, who's a WW2 veteran, fought in Normandy. He holds his walker out like this because the only way he gets any comfort is by leaning this far forward. And he comes through and he looks up at you like this. The other day I said, "How's it going, Gordon?" He goes, "I had a dream I was 12 years old again, and it was like heaven." And I thought, wouldn't we all like that, be that 12-year-old again? Before the grinders cease, because they're few. Anybody got any teeth issues? We had to, I thought we might have to take out a loan. My wife had 2 teeth that had to be pulled. They concreted in these things and screwed in a tooth where that was. I told the dentist, I said, "We must really love you, giving you this much of our annual money." Before the windows are dim, before your vision problems start. Before the sound of grinding is low and the daughter's songs are low. Saying before your hearing goes, yeah. You sit there and you go, Another one of our ministers, he's supposed to have hearing aids, but he's a guy, so he does not want hearing aids even if he can't hear. And I was sitting there going, this is great. This is great. Our ministry team really depends on Zachary, the guy in his 20s, because the rest of us are getting a little old. Before you begin to rise at the sound of the birds, you just keep waking up early. I woke up this morning at 4:30 and went, I could have slept a little later. Hotel rooms are horrible at 4:30 in the morning. I wandered around. I can tell you, 61 is the amount of little tiles in the ceiling. I was just in there going, crazy. And then they started where they served breakfast. I went down to eat breakfast, and I was the youngest guy down there eating breakfast. So I felt pretty good about life. I was the only one that could run the waffle machine. I was the only one that knew when it beeps, you flip. I don't want to brag, but that was a good moment for me. Before you begin to rise the sound of the birds, and then he uses all these other images, but he closes with, before you die, are buried, and your spirit returns to God. I have a friend, he's a preacher, and he has a horror story from his past. I don't know, maybe you were raised like this too, I wasn't, but he believed that you should be baptized at 12 because that's when Jesus went and talked to the teachers in the temple. In my whole life, I've never connected those two. Doesn't make any sense to me. But he says 12 is the age. And then I thought, well, I was baptized at 12. But this young man came up and he had just turned 11. He sat down on the front row and he said, I've been studying with my mom and dad and I'm ready to be baptized. And he said, why don't you wait? Your mind is more ready for this when you're 12. He did his funeral at 34 and had never been baptized. That's a horror story. That's a horror story for that mom and that dad. That's a horror story for the whole congregation. It's a whole horror story for our whole brotherhood, that a soul was lost over that one moment. He tried to get him later to be baptized, and he said, no. You wouldn't let me. Now I don't want it. It's so important that we nurture those who are young, help them to know Christ, see them born into the Lord's church. I really think we minimize it a little. When I have gospel campaigns, I'm talking about all the people that live out in the community. We need to go out and save them, and we do. We know that. But who's the first ones we ought to save? It's got to be our kids, our grandkids. Three little boys. Gavin, age 11. Kieran, age 9. Josiah, age 6. Those are my grandsons. I have no bigger mission field in history than those little boys. I am so thankful that my children were baptized believers and they remain faithful to this day. Because I've got a lot of friends who are preachers that can't say that about their kids. You know, right? I have aunts and uncles who raised their kids the exact same way I was raised, and yet they did not ever become a member of the Lord's church. And I've tried to figure that out because there has to be things that we learn from that. Because my aunt and uncle, Uncle Earl and Aunt Pat, planted 4 congregations while Brian, their son, was at home with them. I mean, that's an incredible thing. They went and did mission work. They came back, and Uncle Earl taught the same things that my dad taught me. It was his big brother. And yet, Brian said from the time he was young, I don't want anything to do with nonsense. I don't want anything to do with those fables. And now he is a gay Buddhist. It confounds me how he made such stupid decisions. And then we were talking one day, and he said, you know, I did want to be baptized once, but they told me that I hadn't been doing a good job of cleaning my room. And I went to Dad and said, Dad, thank you. Thank you for putting first things first with me. Thank you for letting me know what's truly important. See, I assumed they did it the same way, but they didn't. But I do have a family member who was raised very, very similar, and he became a church member, and then when he went to college, there was this church that had its own sports league. They had for the college students, they had a go-kart track. They had all this cool stuff, so he started going there, and now he does things that I don't even understand. We have a short amount of time to get everything across. We've got to maximize that time. One of my teachers at Sunset, his name's Ed Wharton, came to me when I showed up at school. I was blessed. I graduated college pretty quick. Just before I turned 20, I enrolled at the School of Preaching, and he said, it's so great. He goes, Chris, you started preaching almost 6 years ago. Just think about all the years you'll get to preach. And he would always talk about, think of all the sermons you'll get to preach. Think about all the people you'll see won to Christ. Think about and he would keep it in my mind all the time that It's like He knows I'm never going to be unfaithful, that I'll never quit and do something else. Inside our youth, we need the people who believe in us that way, because that's the time to decide. Most people that are converted into the Lord's church are converted at the same basic time in history, 12 to 22. School age, up through college. And that's a big job. Angie Caswell and I were talking about it once. Mom and Dad is here. Angie said, someone asked her once if making bows and selling them was her job. You know what she said? You probably know what she would say. She said, no, I'm raising kids. That's a good thing. I don't want to lose those little boys. But I need to have that same heart for every little boy, every little girl. I need to let them know, like I let my grandkids know. I don't care if they ever touch a ball. I don't care if they ever make an A. I just care that they're right with God. And I got to always have that heart with all these young people that come through. Because if they will give their heart at that age, think of all they'll do for God in this world. I'm grateful. I baptized a 91-year-old lady in a wheelchair the other day. Did you know that 91-year-old ladies who are a little big, they float? Yes, they do. The wheelchair goes down, they float up. I didn't know, but it was this weird thing where people were going, what were you doing with your arms? Well, I was putting my elbow on her knee, going down, trying to get her in there. And it was hilarious, except for to me and to Janie. But that's so awesome. But how many people that age do you know that make a drastic life change to follow God? Remember the Creator in the days of your youth. So here's his conclusion. He says in chapter 12, verse 9 through verse 12, that he collected and classified many proverbs. You know who wrote the book of Proverbs? Solomon. That's what he did. He believes that is being the preacher, collecting wisdom and sharing it with others. That's why he called himself Koheleth rather than Solomon. Then he said, in the end, what must you do? You must fear God and keep His commandments. The Hebrew has two different words for fear, and sometimes we mix them up. This word for fear means to have awe. To look at God and go, wow, amazing. Never lose that awe of who God is. And then do what He says. Don't think your own way through it. Just do what He says. I think that's one way that fathers can prepare their kids to be Christians, is make sure they follow your rules. I think moms can, when they say, pick this up, clean this up, move this, make them follow the rule, because we need to learn that that's important. And then he answers why we do it. And that's because we will be judged based on it. How we view God and how we do what God says. Now, he is speaking under the time of the old law. There's not going to be a lot of grace talk under the old law. But do you remember Jesus saying, if you love me, you will keep my commandments? Matthew 10:25, it is enough in this life for you to be like your teacher, Jesus Christ. Our performance is important. And we need to learn to do it early. Well, that's 12 chapters of Ecclesiastes. I'm glad that Paul said, I don't know what you want to teach on, but I would like for you to teach on Ecclesiastes. And he did me a favor, because that's not what I normally teach on, but I have enjoyed all of it. And I'm grateful that he gave me that opportunity. Let's pray as we close. Then I'm going to drive home and hope to skip the rain. It's still shining out there. Let's pray. Dear Father, please help us live godly lives. Help us to awe you. Help us to be in awe of you. Help us to do the things you tell us to do, because your way is ultimately the wise way, the right way. And we need to live every day knowing that today could be our last. This drive back to Wichita Falls could be the last thing I ever do. And Father, I pray that I will always focus on honoring you and doing what you tell us to do. Father, I do pray for our young that they will honor God in their youth. They will remember their Creator in those days when they can make that choice, when they can dedicate their life to following you. Father, I pray that we will gather true wisdom. We will begin to cut out the wisdom of the world and begin to focus on the wisdom that you give us. And Father, I pray we'll learn from the lessons of Solomon, because we don't want to be frustrated and depressed and anxious about this world. We want to live life knowing that you're above this world and you help us through it. Help us to remember those things. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I appreciate y'all being here. If nobody had been here, I would have spoke anyway.